Minister, this government is, as we all know, presiding over a housing and homelessness emergency, and that's no accident or no error. It's the result of deliberate policy of this government and indeed of previous governments, and in fact commenced by the Fianna Fáil government. And that policy sees housing as a profit-making commodity, and it sees the market as the solution to this emergency. Of course, as we all know as well, as everybody, each and every member of the public knows, it has been an abject failure and it's spreading misery right across this country. We know from the October homeless figures that a new record has been created. 10,514 persons homeless. 1 in 3 of those are children, and those children are being irreparably damaged by government policy. In recent days, we have had 2 reports from housing charities. Simon has told us that there has been an increase of 26% in the number of people turning to their services in the last 12 months. 16,776, up from 13,304 in the previous year. And they also say, Simon, that they have provided emergency accommodation for 1,738 people in 2018, and that's up 79.5%. Thresholds have also reported, and I quote them as saying, there would be double the number of homeless people in Ireland but for its interventions. 11,500 people, they say, were kept in their homes by the organisation in 2018. Minister, your government is deliberately excluding low-income families from local authority house waiting lists, and this condemns these families to pay exorbitant rents and excludes them from the housing assistance schemes. And these limits for local authority house waiting lists haven't been increased for years. And I'll give you an example. In Tipperary, 2 adults and 2 children, a family of 2 adults and 2 children on €27,501, that's €8,500 less than the average wage, cannot get on a local authority house waiting list. Neither can they get a mortgage. In fact, if they were able to get a mortgage, the maximum they would qualify for would be 96,000 odd. House prices in Tipperary have increased by 10.8% and now stand at 183,688. And of course, they also face renting. The average rent in Tipperary now is €853 per month, or €213 per week. And of course, that's an average. So for bigger towns like Clonmel and Neenah, the figure is much more like €1,000 per month. In fact, many families now pay in excess of 40% of their income on rent. And in fact, many families are paying more on rent than they would on a mortgage if they were able to get a mortgage. Now, Minister, that is absolutely mad. Threshold, give us the example of a 3-bed house at Limerick.
Minister to respond.
€1,132 a rent per month.
Minister to respond. You'll have another minute.
The corresponding mortgage on that property would be €838.
Minister Doherty, sorry.
So, Minister, my question is, when is the government going to accept that their housing policy is an abject failure?
Thank you, Minister.
And
please,
when are they going to deal with
question.
the issues that I've raised? Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. I think it's probably fair to say that I don't agree with you with regard to the last statement that you've made. And I think when we look at the facts and the figures of the 64,000 houses that have been built in the last 3 years, the houses that are currently under construction now, the 30+ thousand houses that are in planning application with all of our county councils and on board Finola, shows that Rebuilding Ireland is actually working. When we look at the people and the number of thousands of families that have been taken out of homelessness in the last number of years, it shows that our policies are actually working. But that's notwithstanding that the challenges still absolutely exist, and they do present on a daily basis. And that's why we've adapted and modified Rebuilding Ireland over the last number of years in response to the lovely charities that you've actually named, who do enormous work. Simon, Threshold, Respond, all of the other agencies that work in specific housing and homelessness areas, who do enormous work on behalf of the state for the citizens of the state. And we're very happy to actually engage in financially supporting all of these agencies who do such enormous work. And you've detailed it yesterday. Threshold has issued their report. Simon did their report yesterday. Respond, I think, had a briefing for everybody in the last number of days. They do show very large numbers of people going through their hands, but what they also do show is the response to those large numbers of families and individuals who are asking for help in getting help. And that's exactly what the taxpayers' money should be doing, is helping the agencies who have specific expertise, alongside all of our local authorities, in providing houses for people who need houses. And Deputy, it's not just at a social housing level. There are solutions at every single level. And so you've talked about changing and modifying the rates at which people can apply for social houses. And maybe that does need to be done at our local authorities. But what we also have is our council home loan scheme. We have our Rebuilding Ireland scheme. We have the affordable housing scheme. There's a response at every single level to the people who are at different stages of income support or income levels in the country, to provide houses, and agencies with expertise who are doing an absolutely super job. That all feeds into the numbers of the 64,000 houses that have actually been built in this country in the last number of years. There's some 24,000 houses who are currently being built, and the 33,000 houses that are in planning.
Thank you, Minister. 1 minute.
Or Liv Harson, you'll get grass comes to mind. And Minister, burying your head in the sand and saying everything is fine and everything will be fine is simply madness. It's not sustainable. And it is breaking the social contract between the state and its citizens, and will create serious difficulties, is already creating serious difficulties, but will create much more serious difficulties into the future unless it's stopped. Surely the recent record homeless figures and the chaos in the rental sector alone would indicate that we have a housing and homelessness emergency. We know that the rental market in Ireland provides no security of tenure, is completely unaffordable and is generally of poor quality. We know that 57% of notices to quit are found to be invalid, and we know that the biggest reason for notices to quit properties is that the properties are being sold. And we also know that as a result of that, tenants are being evicted to allow properties to be sold, and those tenants invariably find themselves falling into homelessness.
Minister, to
and that has been indicated by all the agencies.
Minister,
surely,
respond,
Minister,
please.
it's time to cry stop, and surely it is time to declare statutorily a housing and homelessness emergency.
Again, Deputy, with respect, I obviously don't agree with you, because we have a housing system that was entirely broken when we took over and launched Rebuilding Ireland in 2016. We have people who were in negative equity arising from the Great Recession for donkey's years, that took only sheer delight in being able to sell their house when that negative equity receded. And that's why we have a huge, I suppose, outflow from our rental market that needs to be addressed. And that's why we probably have more legislation on rent controls and rent regulations in this House over the last number of years than we've had maybe in the last 30 years. What we have is a number of organisations and our local authorities working successfully with us. We've Wayne Stanley on the radio this morning telling us not only of the great achievements that Simon have done in the last year, but lauding the fact that the policies now are actually working. And yes, it's certainly not perfect, and yes, of course there are still challenges. You heard him on the radio this morning saying that he has offered us advice on how we should tweak things to make them better. That's the good thing about Rebuilding Ireland. Apart from the fact that the facts are speaking for itself and the number of bills and houses that are being provided for our citizens is growing year on year, the plan has been modified to take into account the advice that experts are giving us, and we'll continue to do so until we reach the stage where we're building 35,000 houses each and every year to ensure that everybody that wants a home in this country can have one.
Thank you, Minister.